Hello, truth seekers. Welcome back to the Understanding Mormonism YouTube channel. I'm Dr. John DeLynn, your host. I'm excited to be with you today. Today, we have a really important and interesting topic to cover. Today, the topic is, was Joseph Smith's treasure digging fraudulent? I think it's important to let you know that we do have one past episode that you may find useful in background for today's episode. That episode is called, How Did Joseph Smith Become a Treasure Digger? Check that out if you want. Let's go ahead and dig into today's episode. Was Joseph Smith's treasure digging fraudulent? I think it's important to begin by kind of defining what Joseph Smith's treasure digging actually was. And it turns out that none other than Benjamin Franklin, our founding father, had opinions about it as early as 1729. And this is actually about 90 years prior to Joseph Smith's treasure digging excavations. We have Benjamin Franklin describing what New England treasure digging was like. And I'm going to now read to you what he wrote. He wrote, quote, "There are among us great numbers of honest artificers and laboring people who, fed with the vain hope of growing suddenly rich, neglect their business almost to the ruining of themselves and families, and voluntarily endure abundance of fatigue in a fruitless search after imaginary hidden treasure." So here we have him calling it imaginary, calling it fruitless, saying that people of probably lower class abandon their jobs, lose a lot of money searching for this treasure. Let's continue. He goes on to say, "They wander through the woods and bushes by day to discover the marks and signs. At midnight, they repair to the hopeful spot with spades and pickaxes. Full of expectation, they labor violently, trembling at the same time in every joint through fear of certain malicious demons who are said to haunt and guard such places." Here it's important to note that they are afraid. They believe that spirits or demons guard the treasure, and when they dig, they're afraid. Next, Benjamin Franklin writes, "At length, a mighty hole is dug, and perhaps several cartloads of earth thrown out. But alas, no kag or iron pot is found, no seaman's chest crammed with Spanish pistols or weighty pieces of eight." So here we get the realization that no treasure is ever found. Franklin continues, "Then they conclude that through some mistake in the procedure, some rash word spoke, or some rule of art neglected, the guardian spirit had power to sink it deeper into the earth and convey it out of their reach." Here we learn that it's always the treasure digger's fault if the treasure isn't found, and that these spirits or demons have the ability to withdraw or sink the treasure below as soon as they're close to actually getting to it. Let's go ahead and continue. Franklin writes, "Yet when a man is once thus infatuated, he is so far from being discouraged by ill success that he is rather animated to double his industry and will try again and again in 100 different places in hopes at last of meeting with some likely hit that shall at once sufficiently reward him for all his experience of time and labor." This is a really important point because what it says is that even if treasure diggers don't find treasure, they still end up believing that there is treasure and they want to keep digging. So the beliefs aren't foiled by the lack of success. So in all of this wonderful description of treasure digging, Benjamin Franklin omits one really important part that I'm just going to add of my own volition because I think it's super important and it applies to Joseph Smith. What you need to understand is that these treasure digs often required someone called a scryer or a juggler or a seer or a peeper. This was a person who used a magic object like a peep stone to locate the treasure. It turns out that Joseph Smith was a scryer, he was a peeper, and this is where the term seer in prophet, seer, and revelator comes from the claimed ability to look into a stone like a crystal ball and see things that were naked to the common eye. So, going back to the question of, was Joseph Smith's treasure digging fraudulent, we learn one important thing from Benjamin Franklin, which is that as early as 1728, 90 years before Joseph Smith's treasure digging was understood to be disreputable. All right, that's point number one. Point number two that's super important is that Joseph Smith's scrying or treasure digging perfectly fit the formula that Benjamin Franklin laid out. And to illustrate that, we are going to now hear from Isaac Hale, Joseph Smith's father-in-law, the father of Emma Hale. He writes, "I first became acquainted with Joseph Smith Jr. in November 1825. He was at that time in the employ of a set of men who were called money diggers, and his occupation was that of seeing or pretending to see by means of a stone placed in his hat, and his hat closed over his face. In this way, he pretended to discover minerals and hidden treasure." It's probably important to mention that Isaac Hale is using words like pretending to describe Joseph Smith. So Isaac Hale knows that Joseph Smith is not really finding any buried treasure or even seeing in his stone. He's pretending to see, which indicates it is probably fraudulent. He goes on to write, "Young Smith gave the money diggers great encouragement at first, but when they had arrived in digging to near the place where he had stated an immense treasure would be found, he said the enchantment was so powerful that he could not see." This is crucial because if you tell them up front there's no treasure, they're not going to pay you to help them. But if you tell them, "I can help you find treasure," and then you spend days searching for it and days digging for it, and it's at the very end of the dig where all of a sudden it's like, "Oh no, the treasure's gone," that's the only way you get paid for the treasure dig. So that's super important. And again, it's important to note that the way Isaac Hale describes Joseph Smith's treasure digging maps perfectly onto the fraudulent treasure digging that Benjamin Franklin described 90 years earlier. Let's continue. As a summary, hopefully it's clear to you that Joseph Smith's scrying or treasure digging fit the formula that Benjamin Franklin described. Superstitious people believing that there's buried treasure. There's a strong money motivation, both on the part of the scryer. Joseph Smith desperately needed money. His family was bankrupt and destitute, but there's also a money motivation on behalf of the treasure seekers who they're trying to get rich quick. In addition, there's a seer with special powers to locate the treasure. He uses a peep stone. A spirit guards the treasure. The spirit can remove the treasure as soon as they get close to it. No treasure is ever found. The participants were always blamed. The participants became even more committed after the treasure was not found, and people lost a ton of money. Okay, let's go on to the next point. Point 3. By Joseph Smith's day, scrying was illegal. So not only was it clearly disreputable, was it known by Benjamin Franklin and Isaac Hale to be a disreputable practice, and not just them, but many of Joseph Smith's neighbors, associates, people in the town, all recognized treasure digging as fraudulent, but it turns out it was also illegal. It turns out there were actually laws on the books by 1813 in the New York State Legislature, which read, quote, "And all jugglers and all persons pretending to discover where lost goods may be found shall be deemed and judged disorderly persons." So Joseph Smith's treasure digging was illegal. And not only was it illegal, it turns out that in 1826, Joseph Smith was arrested for and found guilty of disorderly conduct for his scrying or for his juggling or treasure digging. Point number 5, Emma's father recognized Joseph's treasure digging as a scam. This is from Peter Ingersoll, someone who was in the presence of Joseph Smith and Isaac Hale when they had a falling out. Peter Ingersoll writes, "When we arrived at Mr. Hale's in Harmony, Pennsylvania, from which place he had taken his wife," meaning Joseph had taken Emma away from Isaac Hale, "a scene presented itself truly affecting. His father-in-law, Mr. Hale, addressed Joseph in a flood of tears. 'You have stolen my daughter and married her. I had much rather have followed her to her grave. You spend your time in digging for money, pretend to see in a stone, and thus try to deceive people.'" These are pretty serious words. Isaac Hale's basically saying, I would rather die with my daughter than have her marry a peep stone treasure digger like you, Joseph Smith. Those are condemning words. But it goes even further. Point number 6, Joseph Smith admitted to at least 2 people that his peepstone treasure digging, his scrying, his seering, his juggling was in fact fraudulent. He admitted it. This is a quote again from Peter Ingersoll. He said that when Joseph was confronted by Isaac Hale, quote, Joseph wept and acknowledged he could not see in a stone now, nor never could, and that his former pretensions in that respect were all false. He then promised to give up his old habits of digging for money and looking into stones. And it wasn't just Isaac Hale. Ava Hale, the son of Isaac, stated that Joseph Smith told him that this peeping was all damned nonsense. Smith admitted that he was deceived himself, but he did not intend to deceive others. He said that he intended to quit the business of peeping and labor for his livelihood. In other words, Smith admitted that this was a fraud, that he was deceiving people. He sometimes said it was intentional, sometimes says it wasn't, and that he promised to stop this behavior and to not do it anymore, even though he continued to do it. Point number 6 was that the LDS Church tried to hide or deny Joseph Smith's treasure digging and peepstone use for over a century. When LeGrand Richards was interviewed, he was asked, I thought somebody said that Joseph Fielding Smith had Joseph Smith's seer stone. LeGrand Richards responds, no, we don't have that. Then the person responds, you don't have that? And Richards says, no. And then the person says, is the seer stone in the historical department? Richard says, we don't have a seer stone. That went back with the plates. And then he was asked, oh, okay, I hadn't heard that. I see. I thought that somebody said that it was still out there somewhere. Richard says, what? And then they say, do you know what the stone looked like? And Richard says, no, I've never seen it. And I don't think there is any living man who has seen it. And then finally, we have John A. Widstow writing, carefully examined, the charge against the Smith family and Joseph Smith, the boy and young man, failed to be proved. There is no acceptable evidence to support them, only gossip and deliberate misrepresentation. The Smith family were poor but honest, hardworking and religious people. Joseph Smith was not a money digger, nor did he deceive people with peepstone claims. It is almost beyond belief that writers who value their reputations would reproduce these silly and untrue charges. It suggests that they may have set out to destroy Mormonism rather than to detail true history. And so according to the Apostle John Widstow, people that told the truth about Joseph Smith, who shared the honest truth that Joseph Smith did use a peepstone, that he did treasure dig, that he did deceive people, that he did use it in the Book of Mormon, John Widstow maligns them and smears them as dishonest, as trying to destroy Joseph Smith, as trying to destroy the church, which is unkind and unfair and untrue and very misleading. What is also unkind and unfair and misleading is that the Mormon church went as far as to excommunicate several scholars for speaking openly about Joseph Smith's peepstone use and treasure digging. If you know Fawn McKay Brody in her book, No Man Knows My History, if you know D. Michael Quinn in his book, The Early Magic Worldview, Grant Palmer's book, An Insider's View of Mormon Origins, and of course, Jeremy Runnels in his CES letter, all 4 of these scholars spoke openly about Joseph Smith's peepstone use and treasure digging, and they were all excommunicated for talking about this issue and other issues like it. Point number 9, it was only until 2015 that the Mormon Church finally admitted that it had the seer stone in its possession all along. It turns out that Joseph Fielding Smith was deceiving people, that John A. Widstow was deceiving people, that Hugh Nibley was deceiving people, that the church did have a peepstone, that Joseph Smith was a treasure digger, and that he was engaged in fraudulent behavior as a treasure digger. And what's even more sad about all of this is that to this date, the Mormon Church has not apologized for excommunicating Fawn Brody or Grant Palmer or Michael Quinn or Jeremy Runnels or any of the other people that they have punished or maligned or excommunicated for talking openly about the truth. And the church still has not apologized for deceiving the membership for well over a century. Now, it's probably important to ask, why in the world did LDS church leaders hide the information and excommunicate people who talked about Joseph Smith's treasure digging for so long? The answer can be found by none other than Hugh Nibley. Mormon leaders acknowledged that telling the truth about Joseph Smith's treasure digging would be devastating to faith. And here is a quote from Hugh Nibley himself. If Joseph Smith was convicted of treasure digging, that's a paraphrase, quote, "It is the most damning evidence in existence against Joseph Smith." Finally, I think what's potentially most egregious of all is that the LDS Church today, in 2020, still continues to mislead its members and the general world about how the translation really happened. If you look at the art that you can still find today in the ensign, on the church's website, on the many blog pages, and in the church's advertising materials, you will see the church continue to use art that represents Joseph Smith sitting in front of the plates, studying the characters, and, quote, translating, when we know that in reality, these pictures are much more accurate. Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon by sticking its head in a hat by looking at a peepstone. Modern apologists will say the church admits now that it has the peepstone, and it's starting to use art like this in its representations of the translation. Yes, but that's only after misleading people for over a century and punishing and excommunicating people who told the truth. The church needs to be honest, and the church needs to come clean. So, I end as we began. The question is, was Joseph Smith's treasure digging fraudulent? I guess in the end, you have to decide. Thank you so much for joining us today on Understanding Mormonism, the YouTube channel. Please subscribe to this channel, and please share this video with as many people as you possibly can so that we can spread the good word and educate as many people as possible about the truth of Mormonism so that they can make informed decisions about what they want to do with their lives, having all of the information. Thanks, everybody, and take care.